week 8 of the fantasy football season. He has tight end start sits every matchup this week. Thursday night, Minnesota Vikings at the Rams. TJ Hawkinson, he did practice last week, obviously didn't play. And this week, if he does play, he's a borderline option to me. Even if he's on the field, TJ Hawkinson, he's not going to be 100%, I believe, coming off the ACL. He's not going to play a lot of snaps. They're going to ease him into a role, especially this week on the turf in Los Angeles. So if he does play, TJ Hawkinson, he's a borderline option at best. Like I said, he's not going to be at 100% capacity in this offense. Johnny Munt will be a sit. He hasn't done much this season, more of a blocking tight end. And pretty much Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, the only players have had value week in and week out. And Sam Darnold on this team for fantasy owners. Colby Parkinson a sit. His ceiling really hasn't been high. Now if Cooper Kupp returns to the lineup, which it looks like this week, even if he only plays 70-80% of the snaps as Cooper Kupp, Parkinson's going to take a back seat even more in this offense. And when Cooper Kupp was out, he didn't really do much. He's a sit. Green Bay Packers at the Jaguars. Tucker Kraft found the end zone once again last week. Him and Jordan Love have great rapport. And Jordan Love, what a quarterback he's been this season, spreading the football out to all his weapons on the offense. But Tucker Kraft, a good route runner, good hands, and a good goal line option. And this week in an easy matchup at the Jaguars, I think he goes out there and has a good game once again. Evan Ingram, the number 1, number 2 target in this passing game between him and Brian Thomas. 2 weeks in a row since he returned, Evan Ingram, 8 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. And he's been peppered with targets. That is Evan Ingram. And he's a tight end that can line up anywhere in an offensive situation. So Evan Ingram this week, I know it's a tougher matchup versus a good defense of the Packers, but he's definitely a start. Arizona Cardinals at the Dolphins. Trey McBride wasn't a great game last week, a mediocre middle-of-the-pack performance, but he's the number 1 option, I believe, in this passing game. Marvin Harrison, in his rookie year, he really hasn't done much for this Cardinal team besides 2 or 3 good games. And Trey McBride, he's been a target machine. Kyler Murray likes throwing it to Trey McBride. They got a good rapport. And this week, in a beatable matchup at the Miami Dolphins, he's a nice start. Once again, Jonnu Smith, a borderline option. Tua possibly returning to the lineup for this Miami Dolphin team. It most likely is going to happen, but I'm not 100% going to put a stamp on it, where we got to see the practice reports and how he's doing in practice. So Jonnu Smith last week, he had a big game, over 100 yards, finding the end zone. But the thing is with Tua, we've seen it. He doesn't target the tight end in his offenses, where it's been Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Achane out of the backfield when Tua was in there. So this week, Jonnu Smith, a borderline option if he's in the lineup, is Tua. New York Jets at the Patriots. Tyler Conklin, he did find the end zone last week on a 1-yard touchdown, but he just hasn't been targeted enough in this offense. And now with Devontae Adams in town for this New York Jet team, he's the 4th or 5th option in this offense. Even in a good matchup in New England, a team he had a big game versus early in the season, he's a sit. Hunter Henry a start. He's the number 1 option, in my opinion, in the passing game since Drake May's taken over at the starting quarterback position. And Henry, 2 weeks in a row, double-digit fantasy points. Last week he had 90 yards. And this week in a beatable matchup versus a Jet linebacking crew that just isn't that good, I think Hunter Henry is a start once again. Baltimore Ravens at the Browns. Mark Andrews, the last 3 weeks he's gone out there and he's played good football. In the last 2 games, 3 touchdowns, including 2 touchdowns in last week's game at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Harbaugh was right. People got to be patient, and Mark Andrews is going to have some big games, and he did that last week with 20 fantasy points in PPR league. So Andrews, he's back in this offense. He's making plays. I know the targets haven't been great, but he's found the end zone 3 times in the last 2 games. He's a start. Isaiah Likely, besides that week 1 monster game at the Chiefs, pretty much has been non-existent. He's a sit. David Njoku was start. And Njoku, he's been a good tight end without Deshaun Watson. And now with Watson out for the season and tearing the Achilles, it's going to be Thompson Robinson or Winston, the quarterback, and Njoku, a freak athlete. Last week we saw him go out there, have the monster game, 10 for 76 on 14 targets and found the end zone. And he's a starter this week. Philadelphia Eagles at the Cincinnati Bengals. Dallas Goedert, he was out last week with a hamstring injury. Grant Katara filled in at the tight end position. So if Goddard plays, he's a start for me. One of the better tight ends this season. I know he had an expanded workload when A.J. Brown and Smith were out of the lineup, but this Bengal defense, they just can't stop anyone, and the Joker went for the big game last week versus defense. So Goddard will be a start, and Grant Katara, if he's going to start this ball game, if Goddard's out, he's not going to be an option for me and for fantasy owners. He doesn't have much of a track record. And also as well, this Philadelphia Eagle team, they don't really target the tight end when Goddard is out of the lineup. Mike Gesicki, Eric Gold Jr., that's it. It's pretty much this offense is Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and rightfully so, for this Cincinnati Bengal team. So Gesicki had a couple flash games early in the season, but the last few weeks, we really haven't seen much out of him. He's a sit. Eric Gall, same thing as well. He really hasn't had a high ceiling, even though he's a good prospect coming out last season in the NFL draft. He's a sit. Indianapolis Colts at the Houston Texans. Kyle Grant and Mo Alley Cox, they haven't done much. And no one in this receiving game has done anything with Anthony Richardson in their quarterback. So both these tight ends are easy sits with a full slate. Dalton Schultz a sit for me as well. You would think Dalton Schultz would be more in this offense with Nico Collins out, at least the next few weeks. And we've seen it now 3 games without Collins. Schultz hasn't done much. Stroud's not targeting him. It's been Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. So Schultz a sit this week. Tennessee Titans at the Lions. Chigga we did have 4 catches, 50 yards with Rudolph at quarterback last week at the Bills, but with a full slate and inconsistencies all season for Kwango, he's an easy sit. Sam Laporta, definitely a bust. He was the first tight end taken off the board this season, and besides a couple games here and there, Sam Laporta hasn't done much. But now with Jameson Williams suspended 2 games, I think the targets are going to go up for Sam Laporta. We know he's a matchup problem for linebackers and safeties, but they're just not targeting him. But I think the target share is going to go up, like I said, and I think they're going to make it a point to get Sam Laporta the football. This week is the Detroit Lions. I will put him in the line. Atlanta Falcons at the Bucks. Kyle Pitts has started the last 3 weeks now. He's been solid for this Atlanta Falcon team. Double-digit fantasy points 3 weeks in a row. And he's finally reaching full potential in fantasy football as Kyle Pitts, where he has a quarterback that actually can move the football down the field and get Kyle Pitts the football. And Kirk Cousins, we know, has a good IQ. I know the struggles have been a problem over the last couple of weeks, but in a great matchup this week at Tampa Bay, I think Cousins and Pitts both have good games, and we've seen it a few weeks ago where Cousins went off for a big game and Pitts had a big game with 12 fantasy points. Cade Otton to start now with Chris Godwin, Mike Evans out for this Tampa Bay Buck team. Cade Otton's going to get a lot of targets and possibly might be the number 1 option in this passing game for Tampa Bay. They're down to Jalen McMillan and Sterling Shepard as the top 2 targets in this passing game, so Cade Otton a must start with those injuries. New Orleans Saints at the Chargers. Juwan Johnson, Foster Monroe. We haven't seen much out of these players over the last few weeks. Taysom Hill possibly could return in this game as well, but he's not really a fantasy option. If he's not getting goal line touches, is Taysom Hill. He hasn't done much throughout his career, so they were all sits. Will Disley had the big game, 8 for 81 in that loss at the Arizona Cardinals. But I got to see more consistency week in and week out because Disley's done nothing all season long besides that ball game last week. So he's a sit. Bills at the Seahawks. Dalton Kincaid to start. Dalton Kincaid now, obviously his targets are going to go down a little bit with Amari Cooper with this Buffalo Bill team. But the only thing, it might actually open up the field a little bit where more defenses now have to worry about Cooper. They got to worry about Khalil Shakir. Have to worry about Keon Coleman, who had a breakout game last week. And Kincaid, he's a good tight end catching the football. He was a first-round pick last season for a reason. And his floor has pretty much been 7 fantasy points this season in PPR league. So with tight end being a weak position all season long, Kincaid, believe it or not, he's been actually a consistent tight end. Noah Fant, the borderline option. The last 2 weeks, he's been putting up numbers as Fant. One of the better yard after catch tight ends on the season. Last week, 2 chunk plays, 21-yard catch, a 29-yard catch. And Noah Fant, like I said, he was solid with the Denver Broncos. The only thing, he's the 3rd or 4th target in this offense behind Metcalf, behind Jackson Smith-Njigba, behind Walker out of the backfield. But this week, I think Noah Fant, if you're in a pinch at tight end with injuries, is a borderline option. Chicago Bears at the Commanders. Cole Kmet, he's locked in as a start. Cole Kmet coming off a big game a few weeks ago at the Jaguars before the bye in Week 6, where he had 2 touchdowns in that one. So Cole Kmet, we've seen 2 monster games out of him this season. This week, a beatable matchup at the Commanders, where their defense has definitely played better and improved, but I still believe Kmet could go out there, have a good game. Zach Ertz to start. Zach Ertz, one of the more consistent tight ends this season in fantasy football, and the number 2 target in this passing game behind Terry McLaurin. So Ertz found the end zone last week with Marcus Mariota at quarterback. Ertz, he's got a good IQ. I know he's in his mid-30s, knows how to run routes, and like I said, he's the number 2 option in this passing game. Kansas City Chiefs at the Raiders. Juju Smith-Schuster, the latest wide receiver to go down for the Chiefs, and that means more targets for Travis Kelce, even though last week he didn't do much, and he's the number 1 option in this passing game, even though he's declined definitely this season. It's Travis Kelce. He's still a serviceable tight end. He's still going to have some big weeks, and this week in a matchup with the Raiders, where he's owned them throughout his NFL career, he's an easy start. Brock Bowers a start, best tight end in fantasy football this season, number 1 target in this passing game, especially with Devontae Adams traded a couple weeks ago to the New York Jets. I mean, it's good, and Gardner Minshew is going to be in there quarterback, but Brock Bowers, he's a matchup problem. One of the best tight ends to come out in college football in the last decade, and he's an easy start this week. Carolina Panthers at the Denver Broncos. Jatavion Sanders, Tommy Trimble, they're both sits. Pretty much in this offense, besides Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Johnson, no one's getting anything going for this Panther team, and it's a tough matchup. At the Broncos, there sits Adam Trautman, Greg Dulcich sits. No one in this passing game besides Sutton at times has done much for this Bronco team, where it's pretty much been running the football with Devontae Williams playing great defense and Bo Nix running the football a whole lot and being a game manager. So they're both sits even in a good matchup. Cowboys at the 49ers, Jake Ferguson to start each and every week. The number 2 option in this passing game behind CeeDee Lamb. And Jake Ferguson's a good route runner. Pretty good yard after catch tight end as well. And like I said, Dak Prescott's always had a good rapport with his tight ends. And in a ball game where the Cowboys, I believe, will be trailing, even with the big injuries to Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, I think Jake Ferguson's going to get good target share and get the football a decent amount in this one. George Kittle will start. I know he's banged up with the foot injury, and we don't know if he's going to play or not. It's George Kittle, but with Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel out in this ball game, George Kittle's going to be a target monster, and this Cowboy defense all season long hasn't stopped anyone. So I think if Kittle does play, he's a must-start and a top 1-2 option this week in the final game. New York Giants at the Steelers on Monday night. Theo Johnson, Daniel Bellinger sits. Theo Johnson had a touchdown in last week's ball game, but it was called back. And no one's doing much in this game besides Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson. The tight end position's pretty much been phased out in terms of consistent targets and making plays for this New York Giant team, where they've pretty much been blockers and desperation dump-off passes to these guys. So they both sits. And Pat Freiermuth, he's a start for me. Russell Wilson, we know he's had a good career with the tight end position in his NFL career. And Pat Freiermuth, we know he's a good route runner. We know he's a good target. And we also know there's been some weeks where he's been non-existent as Freiermuth for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. But this week with a pretty good matchup versus the New York Giants coming to town. And Freiermuth, at least this season, 6 or more fantasy points in 6 out of 7 games. I believe he could do that once again and have a decent performance. So that's tight end start sits every matchup for week 8 of the fantasy football season.